thank you all for coming. We're thankful for all of our panelists who we'll introduce in just a moment for coming and participating with us. My name is Zane McGee. I'm the director of the Writing Center, and if you've been to our workshops before, we try to host a workshop about once a month that helps students focus on what is their current writing task that they're working on during this point in the semester and how they can prepare themselves for it. And so that's one of the reasons we're looking at CPE workshops right now, is that if you aren't aware, there's some deadlines coming up, so you can begin working on that as well. So I want us to begin by just having our panelists go down and introduce themselves and their role here today, and then I would like us briefly just to go around the room and kind of you share with the panelists what your interests are in being here today, what your interests are in CPE, and that will kind of help them gear some of their responses as well to what will be the most constructive for you all as well. So start with Letitia.
Hi, I'm Letitia Campbell. I'm on the faculty here, and I direct the I'm working in the Office of Contextual Education. I direct Con Ed 1 and CPE. So in the CPE part of my role, I advise students who are thinking about CPE and who are interested in chaplaincy, and I work with all of the CPE programs in the region to help make sure that we're connected, that we're communicating well, and that their programs and our students' needs are aligned as much as possible.
I'm Martha Wright. I'm a certified educator at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, where we have 2 sites, Eggleston right across the street, or really across several streets from here, but and then Scottish Rite, which is at the top end of the perimeter. Been at Children's for 8 years. I am an alum of Candler, 1982. So we'll move on past that now.
My name's Stephen Speakman, and I work at Emory Midtown Hospital. It's right down by the Fox Theater and the Bank of America building. I've done all of my CPE at Emory Midtown, did my internship there, my residency there, and now currently I'm an educator candidate. So I'm in the training process as an educator, and I help to lead the intern groups there at Midtown Hospital. I also graduated from Candler in 2015.
So we'll begin with, I've posed earlier 3 questions to the panelists that they'll briefly give responses to, and then I would like us to leave about 10 or 15 minutes for you to ask specific questions that you have to them. But just so you know the questions that are coming in and to review for our panelists, I would like us to start with what is the trait, the most important trait that you look for in a CPE application? The second would be, what is either the most common mistake or the biggest mistake that you most often see in CPE applications? And then I would like to just give them a chance to offer just general advice that they have about the CPE process. And so 2 of our panelists will speak specifically from experience with reading and processing through these applications, and then Letitia will also offer some feedback from this end of it on helping students write and process through it. And then I'll chime in with writing advice at some point to tell you to go see the Writing Center, and we'll help you edit your responses. So our first question, what is the most important trait that you look for in a CPE applicant? Do either?
I want to preface my answer by saying I know that in most of our life, when we are going for an interview, we are putting our best foot forward. I don't want to see that in the application, because I want to see if you can be vulnerable and reflective. And so trying to polish it up and not show any of the places where you struggle is not going to be helpful to me in processing an application. What I mean is share as much as you can comfortably share, and then reflect on what this event meant, or what does it mean that you're the middle child in your family, or what does it mean that your parents have divorced. I'm wanting to see if you can look at your history, know the strengths of that history, and know the problems of that history. So that's my quick answer.
Ms. Brown?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways I'll be echoing that answer. In the sense that the CPE application process is not a corporate application process or an interview process, in the sense that I'm really looking at, can I get to know the authentic you? And how can you communicate that to me in writing? And so I think that ability to reflect deeply is probably the number one thing that I'm looking for. That as you're identifying life experiences, the people and the places and the things that have shaped you and that have brought you to this point in your life, are you able to really reflect on that and make meaning of it and invite me into conversation about it? Because that's a lot of the work that you'll be doing in CPE, is dialoguing about who you are and where you came from and how that gets stirred up with the clinical work that you're doing and your interaction with the peers. And so the application is kind of the first round for me to see what is your ability to really look at your own life through that lens and reflect about it.
And one of the things about this is I look at the application, that's the first, that's the introductory conversation between me and whoever I'm going to end up interviewing, and who's going to end up interviewing me, because this is a two-way process. That maybe what you realize in writing the application is I'm not really good at deep reflection on specific issues in my life. Well, write that. I'd eat that up. You know, that you are aware of that. So I hope that you can go about this being more excited about starting a relationship with somebody rather than just being undergirded by fear of, am I doing this right? You know, are they going to like what I say? Because CPE is relational. That's what you're going to be doing. And so if you can think about the application process as your introduction to a conversation that's going to continue.
Tisha, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, one thing I will add is that how many of you have actually looked at the CPE application? Okay, that's fantastic. So most of you have actually looked at it. The questions, as you've seen, are very open-ended, but they invite deep and thoughtful and extended responses. So starting early is a good thing. And also, you might go back and look at some of the material you wrote for your application to Candler, you know, which also wasn't the same set of questions, but it was asking you about who you are, what's drawing you here. And so it's not exactly the same genre as you've heard them say, but that is one place to start. Or if you're in an ordination process, some of your early paperwork where you're giving your committee and the other people you're in conversation with some background about who you are and your spiritual path.
And I think, once again, how to be more descriptive and kind of giving the heart of the matter as opposed to just reporting. I'm less interested in just a list of all the things that you've done or the places you've been, but really, as Martha was saying, what the meaning is and how that shaped you or how that continues to impact where you are today.
Which gets into the second question. What are the mistakes that people make? Giving me a chronology of your life would be one of the things that I see most often that is not helpful. I do want to know some facts about your growing up, but I also want to know how those facts have impacted and influenced you. What difference does it make that you worked 4 summers at a summer camp? How did that transform you? So I think making chronological list is one of the things that I oftentimes have to send the application back and say, I need you to fill this in more. What does it mean? And the second thing is, if somebody has lived to 21 or 41 or 65, a reasonably full account of your life cannot be done in one page and in 3 paragraphs. Now, I'm not looking for 10 pages, but if you're going to reflect on anything that's happened in your life, it's going to be more than 1 page. And if it's too short, I'll send it back and see if you want to try again.
So that actually raises a question for me. So for a strong application, not just for one question, but for all the questions that are in the standard application, what's the range of length that you would say you typically see for a strong application?
It's hard for me to give a number to because it's really, for me, it's not about the page length, but it really is about whether I feel like I've gotten a good comprehensive glimpse of the major things that help me get to know who this person is. And so it's more problematic if there's big gaps. If I see you're talking about this meaningful event that happened when you were 12, and then you're jumping ahead to when you were 40, and there's no description about how you got from one place to another. So it's less, I don't know how to answer the page number piece, and it's more, am I getting a full picture of who you are and what has shaped you in your life? I think a common mistake or thing that I see sometimes is people not answering the question or not submitting all of the parts. And so it's really important to look through those various questions are all there for a reason, and to give a really substantive response to each of those different questions.
And I think lengthwise, even my saying a reasonably full account cannot be done in a page isn't about the length of it. It's about how reflective can you be over your whole life in one page. So I agree that we're wanting to see the puzzle pieces that make up who you are. And do you like this puzzle piece, or does it cause you problems? One of the questions that I always ask is, what blessing have you received from being raised in your family? And what is the belly of having been raised in your family? And reflect on events in your life sort of with both sides of that coin.
I think a general suggestion I would have is, or it's a warning sign for me if there's extremes in one way or the other. And so if I'm reading an application that is too polished, or is where it's only the positive things that have happened and no critical engagement with any kind of loss or grief or pain or suffering, that's going to activate some questions for me about how are you in relationship to your own pain, and how can you be in relationship with other people's pain. On the other hand, if the application is exclusively pain and suffering and loss, and that's the only picture that I have of you, that's also going to raise questions for me about what are you doing to tend to the woundedness that's there, the pain that's there. How are you putting that into relationship and getting support? And then are those the only things about you? What are the other things about you that also need to come forward as you think about your life?
I think one thing, if you do one internship and then you want to do another one, or you want to go on to a residency, the biggest thing that is a problem for me is when you turn in the same application that you turned in the first time. That makes me wonder, why in the world do you want to do CPE if nothing has changed? You can use the same application basically, but then you say, well, I realized that what was going on when my mother was an alcoholic was blah, 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 blah. You know, so that I can see you've done some work and that it's been beneficial. So just remember that for future if you decide to do a second unit or a residency. And the other thing, I really suggest that you do the program that is accredited through the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education. There are many places out there that you can get CPE credit. But we're the oldest, and I think we are by far the strongest program out there. And I think sometimes people sell themselves short by going a different route and thinking they're going to be able to be board certified when they've got 3 or 4 units from another organization than ACPE. You won't. It's got to be got to have 4 units to be a chaplain. One of them can be through another organization, but the other 3 have to be through ACPE.
So we've kind of already got into this a little bit, but to close out, is there any general advice that you would have for applicants that you feel like hasn't been touched on? Because some of the pitfalls we've discussed have focused primarily on the reasonable account of life or the biographical section. Are there other sections where you would give specific advice to candidates when they're reflecting on their application?
I think with the helping incident section, one of the challenges or one of the pitfalls that I see sometimes is the way that people think about what help means. And so they think it's only about what they were able to do for someone, what they were able to give them, or materially, or intervene in that kind of way. Whereas I'm actually more interested in what kind of relational care that you can provide and what kind of relational help that you can provide. And once again, even in that piece, how do you reflect on it? What do you think that you did well or went well, or what would you have done differently now that you've thought about it for a while? It's that ability to really think about what you've done and how that would impact your future work. That's part of what I'm looking at.
I think I'm hesitating just because I haven't come up with the words exactly that I wanted. In general, and I've said this before, I hope you can go into the process feeling like, oh, these supervisors are inviting me in, so that you can write reflectively. And the other thing is to remember, you are interviewing them also. So go in having some questions. How many hours per week am I really going to be in the hospital?
What does on-call look like?
Yes, yeah. And ask some of those specific questions about calendar, schedules, supervision. And then you might have a general question, like what are you looking for in intern or a resident? But take the time and give yourself the gift of thinking about interviewing us as well. It helps level the playing field. at least for me, and that helps lower my anxiety. And if my anxiety is lower, I'm going to do a better job.
I'll echo some of what you just said and say, as a general approach to the application, I think to the extent that you can think about it as an invitation to make some space for yourself to do self-reflection and to learn from the process of writing and preparing the application, I think that makes the whole process better. So this is just like it's the first conversation in a relationship with a supervisor and a community of learning. It's the first. It's an opportunity before you even get to the CPE unit and experience to start to open up your own history and your own experience and reflect on that. And so hopefully the process of writing itself will be something that you learn from.
And one other piece of advice, we are already interviewing for the summer. We've already got applications. So the summer feels like a long way away, but in our world, oftentimes the summer slots are filled up by March or April. In my hospital, we have to have the students' names to HR between 3 and 4 weeks ahead of the start time. So we have to be finished. And when units start in mid to late May, that means you got to have it done by April. So keep that in mind, that people are already interviewing for the summer.
And I think thinking about, as you're looking at where to interview, what kind of experience you're interested in having. Because there's a lot of different hospitals here in the Atlanta area. It's a blessing that we have that there's a lot of different CPE contexts. And so what kind of patient population are you hoping to work with? And then also, what is your own personal schedule? Because there are some different kinds of programs and hours, whether it's during a regular school semester, whether it's a part-time over 2 semesters, whether it's an evening group, whether it's a summer intensive. The different sites all around the city have some different kinds of offerings. And so thinking about what would work for you so that you can actually fully be present and really engage at a deep level when you're there on site and when you're doing the reflection work.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Before we real quick turn to open it up for questions from you all, I would like, as the voice that will speak to the process of writing and the mechanics of writing, by way of analogy, we were at a research university, and so hopefully as you've learned to write research papers, part of the essential process of that is the initial stage of gathering all of the raw research information that you'll use, and then something that doesn't get done enough is you as the writer sorting through that to decide what's important and what's not, and leaving the not important to the side and focusing on what is the key information. And sometimes the worst or most difficult papers to read or frustrating papers to read are those that the student just gives you everything they found in books about everything they've thought. And you're left wondering what's the connection between those pieces. And as I listened to our panelists respond, I think that falls into the reflective phase of this application, is that I would encourage you to think about your first draft of these documents not being a true first draft, but being just you dumping the raw information about your life down on a page, and then going back and reflecting on it and deciding what are the key moments here that are worth reflecting on, what are the most important things. I am a middle child, so I would have to include being a middle child on my life trauma events to discuss. So I think that's part of the reflective process of all of this. And the other thing I would say about that is the writing process is that takes time, whether it's a research paper or whether it's reflecting on your own life, to go back and to connect the dots of this is all of the information I have, how does it connect and make sense together? That process takes time. So allow yourself several weeks of writing a draft and then reflecting on it and processing through it and narrowing down what are those most important things as you write. And then, of course, as I said, bring that second draft into the Writing Center and let us help you perfect it. So let's open it up for questions from the room. Are there things that have been sparked by comments you heard here or questions you have on the application.
I mean, I think certainly one of the exciting things about CPE for me is especially in the context of Atlanta, is the diversity that's here, and how to bring together a group that can share diverse experiences and diverse personhood, and kind of learn from the interaction and the group dynamic itself. So that, I think, is happening probably within the broader, like within the Emory spiritual health system. We're trying to be intentional about how we make groups and bringing people together. But really, we're interested in strong candidates and people who we think can do the clinical work, and then also can do the reflective work that it involves as well.
And we do, at Children's, we have a rolling acceptance, and that's one thing that you might want to ask of the places that you're interested in, because if they have a rolling acceptance, that means when an application comes in, we read it and we start deciding then, are we going to interview this person? Some centers may have a writing deadline of when you have to have the application in, and then they do them all at the same time. So just be aware that the process is different in various centers.
I'll speak for Emory. We also do a rolling admission process, and so those groups kind of get formed as the applications come in and as we interview and accept people, and they kind of take shape over the course of time.
In Atlanta, we try to keep all of our fees about the same. And so we have a $500 tuition. And I know that at least some of the other programs have $500. So that's what, in the Atlanta area. Now, other areas, they're all across the board. But we have what's called a consortium, and we'll talk about how much is your holding fee, and so that we're trying to make it equitable for people across the board. In regards to your second question, oftentimes self-care is one of the goals that the students have in their learning contract. They put that there. If they don't, then I raise that question, because it is difficult. You have difficult days, and you go home and you got to show back up the next day and got to figure out how to do that. At Children's, we have dogs and clowns and an art therapist and a music therapist, and so we invite you to participate in some of those things, which is helpful with self-care. But I would say that's high on people's list of watching out for how someone is managing their self-care.
I think with the self-care piece, hopefully a lot of the structures of CPE itself are designed to give people a way to have the support that they need. Part of that is meeting in the group of peers, and hopefully having that space to process and to talk about the challenges that you're experiencing when you're doing the clinical work, or in your personal life, or in your relationships. That oftentimes just having that group of people that have had similar experiences or that can relate is one way of effectively processing and not having that burnout and fatigue. Another part of CPE is the one-on-one with an educator. And so we have regular times together where we talk about the challenges and the struggles and things that are going well, and you're learning on the unit. And so that's another place where some of that support and processing can take place. Within the Emory system, specifically more with our residency program, we have something along the lines of compassion-centered spiritual health. And it's in partnership with Emory University here with the cognitively based compassion training. And so we have a training program for chaplains about how to do meditative practices and centering practices that prevent empathy fatigue and build that sort of resilience. And for interns, I would say we're certainly have our eye on that and encouraging dialogue about it. Something that that was mentioned that I think is good to know is that how much of CPE is self-directed in the sense that you really get to identify what your personal learning goals are. And so thinking about what for you specifically is a challenge, or what are the things that are causing you to be nervous or that you think will be a learning, and getting a chance to focus on those during a unit. And so those things are talked about over the course of the unit together.
I want to go back to the first question about application fee. Most centers in Atlanta have a $50 application fee. So that I didn't want that to get lost since you did ask about that.
Yeah, so the $500 fee is the fee for the unit. And so that would be after you went through the application and got accepted, and we're doing the CP unit itself. But then there would be that initial application fee.
And
that's per one unit?
Per unit, yeah.
And our application fee is $60. I didn't realize that there were some that were $50, so we'll be talking about that at the consortium. Let's see, there was one other thing about fees. Oh, most centers are now requiring a holding fee, which means after you've been accepted, you have so many days to send in, it's half of the tuition, $250. Because we didn't used to do that, but we had so many students who would say yes and then decide not to, and that leaves us not having coverage and sometimes not having a group.
This is a deposit that goes towards your tuition,
It goes
right?
towards your tuition, yes. There's the Association of Professional Chaplains. You can Google that, and they will outline what requirements are to become board certified. And they do have their yearly meetings. And that's just for chaplains across the board. And then it is broken down. You've got the National Catholic chaplains and Jewish chaplains, and so those individual groups might also do things.
I heard you mention before about kind of making sure you have the things in line to get to where you want to be. One of the things to know is that in order to be board certified or in order to do educational work, you need to have an endorsement from a faith community. And so sometimes people go through and they're still in a discernment process or kind of not connected to a faith body. But that's something that if you're wanting to go further professionally within chaplaincy, you need to have a faith group that you're accountable to and that endorses your work. So that's something to keep in mind.
I'm a better person because of CPE. It helps me in every single aspect of my life.
My first experience, I think I found when I was there at the hospital and started doing consults that it was very familiar to me in a way. It reminded me of interacting with elderly folks in the church communities. I grew up as a pastor's kid and had a lot of time where I was in that sort of setting. So I found a comfort level, I think, in the work, and really found a place where I consider myself as being more of an introvert. and really liking to listen and to talk deeply with folks. And this was a space where that was really useful. I didn't have to fill a lot of space in a conversation, but I could actually sit there and make room for the other person to share. And so that tapped into kind of a different part of my pastoral identity that was really important. What kept me doing it also is I really enjoyed the group work and that opportunity to reflect and to be with colleagues and to hear and learn from each other's experience. And so that's kind of what kept me even going in the educational track and continuing to do the CPE side of it as opposed to just the clinical chaplaincy side.
Thank you. Tish, would you like
Great.
to share with us?
Yes, so I'll just say a few things to name some resources that are here at Candler for those of you interested in CPE. First, the annual CPE Day and Open House is Thursday, February 6th. So please mark your calendar. All of the CPE centers in the Atlanta metro area and some centers from further across the southeast will be here on campus that day. They'll have tables in the atrium. The chapel, the preacher for chapel that day is a CPE educator from the Emory system. So plan to come to chapel that day and come to the CPE open house. And that's a great opportunity to have some of those initial conversations with CPE supervisor educators about, what are the hours of your unit? Are there overnights? What does it mean to be on call? Will this work with my work schedule, my class schedule, my childcare schedule? To think about whatever those questions are, that's a good place to start and to narrow down the list of places you're going to apply to based on your constraints and interests. So that's February 6th. You'll find additional information about CPE programs on the bulletin board on the 4th floor across from the water fountain. We put all of the flyers and information that we get from CPE programs in the Atlanta area on that bulletin board. There's also a binder in the Con Ed office on the big table, just once you go through the glass door, the table near Carmen Toussaint's office. There's a binder that has, again, all the information about CPE programs in the area and any information we get from CPE programs further afield. So there's a lot of information there. On the Con Ed website, there's a CPE section. If you look on the left sidebar and you click on CPE, if you go there and you look around a little bit, you'll find links to videos from the last several years of the CPE information session in the fall, where you'll hear Candler students who have just finished a unit of CPE talking about their experiences at all different sites in Atlanta. So if you go through the last several years, you'll hear about 5 or 6 or 7 different places to do CPE in Atlanta, as well as hear from educators from different places. And there's also a link on that page for a video of a chaplaincy roundtable that we did a couple years ago with people who were doing all different kinds of chaplaincy. So those resources are on the website as well. If you're interested in the chaplaincy concentration, you can find the requirements on the Candler website on the concentration section under the MDiv curriculum. You have to dig around a little bit, but all the requirements are listed there as well. And I just mentioned that because several of you did mention chaplaincy. And I'll close by also emphasizing that CPE is not just for people interested in chaplaincy. And there, as Martha said, there are a lot of skills that you will hone and develop in CPE that are highly transferable to all sorts of ministry settings and non-ministry settings too. So thank you for coming. Thanks to the Writing Center for helping to coordinate this.
And my pleasure. Would you join me in thanking our panelists for participating today? If you have any questions, you can contact Letitia if you have questions about CPE specifically, or you can contact myself for the Writing Center if you want work help revising your writing as well. Thank you all for attending today, and please let us know if you have any questions.